Hello, everyone. I'm very excited you could join us for this session on securing Microsoft Teams with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. My name is Terrell, and I'm a senior program manager in the Microsoft Endpoint Customer Experience Engineering Group based out of Redmond. Like many of you, I'm a remote worker and have been so since early November. Today, I'm excited to bring to you a session that will help you deliver the same app protection you applied to Microsoft Outlook to Microsoft Teams. I'm here with my friend John G. from the Microsoft Teams Product Group. And before we get started into our demonstrations, we just want to cover some of the key technologies that we will show you during our demos. Sharing and accessing data comes with its own vulnerabilities, which is why we built tools to make collaboration secure. Conditional access is a customer's ability to control how a user connects to their data. It's a policy-driven approach that basically acts on an if-then system. You can scope down that system to users or cloud services. The conditions we have inside of conditional access, take a look at the device platform. It can look at the IP address, it look at the client app, and based on those conditions, we can then assign an action. Either you're going to allow access or you're going to block access. If you're going to allow access, you can also add additional actions such as require multi-factor authentication, or you can require that the device go through an enrollment process into the mobile device management solution that you're using for your organization. If you do decide to use multi-factor authentication as an additional action, then you get additional security and additional capabilities. Notice that enabling multi-factor authentication prevents up to 99.9% of identity attacks. So it's a huge win for enabling multi-factor authentication when you're using collaboration apps such as Microsoft Teams. Multi-factor authentication is a great way to secure access to your apps and to make sure that the user that's accessing Microsoft Teams is a trusted user. The way that multi-factor authentication works is it prompts for a second factor authentication. It makes sure that the user is using one of the different methods that is mentioned here to add additional verification. If you're using multi-factor authentication, you might want to use the Microsoft Authenticator app because it makes authentication very easy. The Microsoft Authenticator app provides additional authentication methods such as push notification, SMS voice, hardware tokens, software tokens, and Windows Hello, along with FIDO2 secure keys. This makes it a very great application, an easy application to use with great flexibility and convenience. And it's a free app that you can download from the App Store. As you start looking at the flexibility on endpoint security approaches for devices and apps, then you can divide that into two different categories: mobile device management or mobile application management. In the mobile device management scenarios, we have conditional access, which, as we talked about before, can enforce enrollment or look at the device to see if the device needs to be in compliant, or device enrollment can actually push down certificates and other profiles that are necessary. If this is not a device that you own and it's a BYOD device, bring your own device, then we can look at mobile application management, which does not require that devices be enrolled and can separate corporate data from personal data. Internet protection policies basically allow you to secure these BYOD devices because, again, it doesn't allow you to enroll. It ensures corporate data cannot be copied and pasted to personal apps within the device. And it also can be used as a layered security approach with some of our other products, such as Microsoft Information Protection, which empowers you to control how data is accessed from employee devices as well. App protection policies can be divided up into four different categories where protection is provided. One is a multi identity awareness. Here, we're targeting corporate accounts and not personal or unmanaged accounts. Conditional launch. This is where we're looking at the device health, the operating system. Is this a version that we support? Do we need an updated version on this device? The app version itself, the device model, or manufacturer. Are these devices that we support? Is this a manufacturer that we support? App protection policies can be complied to for conditional launch cases to launch the application based on the requirements that you have set here. We also can talk about access requirements. Are we requiring that there be some form of authentication that takes place to gain access into the application, such as a PIN? We can combine that PIN access with biometrics to make it easier for users to enter the application so that they don't have to enter a PIN every time. Credentials. If you want to use credentials in order to access an application, that's another option that we provide. Another key thing we provide in access requirements is inactivity timers. Inactivity timers align with the ability to provide force a re-auth on the application after X amount of time has expired. And last but not least, data protection. We actually want to protect the data that's in the application. We want to be able to protect data from being moved from one location to the next location inside of an app, essentially from a managed app to a non-managed app or a supported app, non-supported app scenario. So that way we can keep that corporate data secure. So we're going to be able to provide DLP policies, and we'll see this in our demonstration. So we're going to be able to block uh, data from being moved from one app to the next app. We're going to be able to encrypt that data so that way it's not able to be stolen behind the scenes. We're also going to be able to force URLs that are accessed, force those into specific browsers. So if you want to use the Microsoft Edge browser, you can force connections that are made through HTTPS, HTTP URLs into the Edge app. And we also provide selective wipe. And selective wipe is the ability to wipe just the corporate data and leave personal data behind. This is a great security feature that secures those devices that have been lost or stolen, and it allows you to retrieve that corporate data off that device in those scenarios. And again, this is something that we will see in our demos. Now that we've highlighted some of these technologies that we'll see in our demonstrations, let's get to our demonstrations and see how these things work in a real world scenario and see how Intune app protection can be applied to Microsoft Teams.
Now that we have a foundational understanding of the integration between Microsoft Endpoint Manager and Microsoft Teams, let's go and take a look at some of these security policies and protections in action. I'm going to switch over to my demo tenant here, and we're in the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center. We're going to take a look at a couple different scenarios. The first being creating a Microsoft Teams app deployment for mobile devices. Then we're going to take a look at how to secure access to that app deployment using conditional access and multi-factor authentication. And then we'll wrap it up with creating some deeper app protection policies on not just Microsoft Teams, but a common set of collaboration applications organizations typically manage. So first, let's go ahead and start with our app deployment, and we'll hop in the apps section and all apps. You see we'll have some pre-created applications here. We're going to go ahead and add, and under app type, we'll select iOS and Store app for this demo example. And as I select next, we're going to search for Teams. And one of the nice parts about using the Store app is once we select Teams, a lot of the details become pre-populated, like description, publisher, minimum operating system, and we have the flexibility to change some of the other items, like how it appears in the catalog. So I'm going to want to tag this as a category for productivity, business, and collaboration and social. And I'm also going to want to make this a featured app in my company portal. So we'll go ahead and select next, and now we have our assignments. And so we have a couple options of required, available for enrolled devices with or without enrollment, or a forced uninstall. For this demo example in my Contoso organization, we want to make this only available for enrolled devices that we know meet our security standards for the organization. We can easily add all users here, but for this demo example, I'm going to actually roll this out just to my my engineering group. And so I'll add them in here, go ahead and hit select. We'll go on to the next page and actually create this deployment out. And as this deployment finishes up, we can easily, if I wanted to change who is actually getting this application, I can go into my properties, scroll down under assignments, and select edit. And then I can easily go ahead and add in all of my users here if I needed. But again, we're going to make this just for our engineering group. So we'll back out of that. And now we want to create a secure access policy when accessing this application. So we're going to switch over to our endpoint security here. And we're going to go ahead and select conditional access. For those of you that might not be familiar with conditional access, it works on if and then statements to assign a risk to a device or user when trying to access corporate data. And based on those if-then policies, we can be flexible in deciding how we want to enforce additional security standards on the user if we don't believe that that user may be who they say they are, or could be a faulty authentication. So you see here, we have a couple of previous policies created, and including an executive conditional access and multi-factor auth policy that we have enabled. So we're going to create one specific for our organizational-wide Teams access. And so some of you may be familiar, in 5 to 10 years ago, we created these things called claims rules in order to allow employees to access their mail off corporate or off premises. And a lot of times it involved things like Active Directory Federation service claims rules and writing these long statements on how to ensure we had secure access. And the great thing about conditional access is, if you've written those claims rules in the past, you can essentially do what we used to do in a couple clicks in a matter of minutes, which we'll do now. So we do have a previously configured Exchange Online requirement. So for this one, we're going to do it for the Teams application and service. So we'll select our new policy, and I'm going to name this Teams MFA plus CA Access Policy. The first thing we'll want to specify is who is going to be impacted by this policy. So we'll select users and groups, a couple different options, and we even have the ability to exclude groups if we wanted to, let's say, increase their security requirements. But for the sake of this example, we're just going to decide that it's all users in the organization. Now we want to specify what cloud applications we're using. Again, we're going to be specific here and select Microsoft Teams. You do have the ability to select all cloud applications. Most organizations tend to create conditional access policies per set of applications or individual application. If you do an all cloud apps one, the thing to think about is if you have business groups or certain user groups that do need that heightened security implied or restricted on them, you will want to create specific groups or specific deployments for that. Now we'll go on to our conditions. And so this is really where the conditional access policy comes into play of the if and then statements. The first thing we'll do is the sign-in risk. And when we configure this, we're going to configure a high and medium sign-in risk. And what these risks are essentially a combination of items like anonymous IP or using a Tor browser and trying to mask the identity or the device that is trying to access corporate data. We also have the ability to identify impossible travel. So if I tried to log in the United States, in India, in China, and then also in Australia in a matter of an hour, we will flag that actually as a risk because it's not humanly possible to travel to those locations. And so it's a combination of different items and how we assess this risk. I encourage you before you create conditional access policies to read our deep documentation on Microsoft Docs. We do a really good job at outlining what these risk measurements are and how they're scored so you can make sure that you feel safe and secure with how you set these risk policies. But again, I'm going to decide that if any user is defined as having a high or medium sign-in risk to this application, I'm going to then require them to complete a multi-factor authentication request in order to access the application. We'll go ahead and select that. Under device platforms here, I'm going to configure this, and I'm going to select my mobile device platforms here, Android and iOS. For this example, I am actually going to select Windows in order to show off what the multi-factor authentication request looks like. But it is common for organizations to create separate policies based on mobile apps and then separate policies on Windows, and even Mac OS is a separate platform. So again, I'm going to select these three just to show off the demo, but it is not uncommon for organizations to create a standalone mobile apps policy and then also one for Windows and perhaps one for Mac as well. Locations, I'm going to leave unconfigured. This is essentially your ability to white or blacklist areas. So it's not uncommon for organizations to create whitelisted trusted locations, whether they're on premises or even some offsite areas that they manage. And you may be able to say that these IPs are trusted IPs. But for this example, I'm going to leave this unconfigured. We can get into client apps. I'm going to leave this non-configured as well. This supports modern auth and legacy auth clients. So now that we've configured our basic high and medium sign-in risk for the device platforms we want to support, the last thing we need to do is specify the grant access control. So again, we do want to grant access, but what we want to do is we want to require multi-factor authentication. And this is where we'll stop at this demo, but another common thing that organizations might do is actually require that device to be marked as compliant. So again, we talk about making sure that the user is who they say they are, but we also want to make sure that device is secured so that it's not jailbroken or that it might not have major security flaws in it. So that is another option, but for this example, we're just going to keep it fairly basic and say this end user needs to just complete their multi-factor authentication request and they'll be allowed to sign in. And so last thing we need to do is actually create this policy. And so we have a couple different options. By default, we have it listed as report only. And what that will do is when we create this policy, it will act as if it's turned on, but it's only going to provide reporting back to me as the IT admin. It's not actually going to enforce the multi-factor authentication requirement until we switch this to on, actually. So I highly recommend if you're just creating it for a later deployment, you can leave it as off, but a lot of organizations before they switch something on will get some reporting on it, or in this case, we actually want to apply this immediately, so we're going to create this policy with it turned on. So now what I will do is, as this policy is being implemented and it's ready to go, is I'm going to pull up my Teams client here as Megan Bowen, and I'm going to attempt to sign in. And I am on an anonymous IP address right now, so it's completely masked. And I am going to get assigned a high risk because we can't identify where I'm coming from. And as we attempt to sign in, you will now see that Megan is being prompted to complete a multi-factor authentication request. So easy enough. Once we created that policy, again, in less than about 3 minutes, we were able to get it implemented and we already have it in enforcement. So now the last area that we want to turn to is creating a deeper app protection policy. So I'm going to switch back to the app screen here, and we're going to dive into app protection policies. And you'll see we have a couple of very generic policies created in data leak prevention. Now, one of the cool things that we want to do here is this is Microsoft Teams focused, but we know organizations don't necessarily treat Teams as a one-off application. It's very common for organizations to be managing not only Microsoft Teams, but Outlook, SharePoint, and even OneDrive. And so sometimes when we have that common set of collaboration applications or even internal custom LOB applications, we can kind of group them in these app protection policies because we know we need a baseline security policy applied. And so that's what we're going to do here. We'll go ahead and create our policy for iOS and the iPad OS. And we're going to name this Microsoft Collaboration App Protection Policy. And we're going to select Next and go ahead and specify our applications. So we are not going to use any custom applications. We are going to keep this to public store applications. So we will begin searching and we'll select Microsoft Teams. Let's go ahead and add Outlook. We're going to add SharePoint. And last but not least, we are going to add OneDrive. We're going to select all those applications, and now we're going to move on to the next screen, which the next 3 screens are where you're really specifying your organizational requirements. So we set a baseline level of security and default security through these next 3 screens, but it is up to you as an organization to make sure that you're meeting your internal organizational requirements, whether they're regulatory or just based on your security policies. On this first screen for data protection, I'm actually going to leave most of these as is. So you have things like restricting cut, copy, and paste, printing organizational data, whether we want to restrict third-party keyboards that could attempt to get around some of those cut and copy controls. So the one thing I will just change here is around receiving data from other apps. I'm only going to want to allow policy managed applications, and then restrict cut, copy, and paste. I'm going to move this to policy managed apps as well. I'm going to hop onto the next screen, and this is our access requirements. So these are things like enforcing PIN requirements or PIN securities. So again, I will leave a lot of these fairly as is, but I'm going to bump up my minimum PIN length to 6 digits. As far as timeout goes, this 30 minutes is the minimum timeout activity. I'm going to be a little bit more generous to my users and say they will get 60 minutes of timeout. Otherwise, we are not going to require a PIN reset, and we are also going to leave the rest of these as default. The last area we get into is the conditions or conditional launches. And so again, we have some great default recommendations ready here for both app and device conditions. Up here for app conditions, you're going to see we have an offline grace period and also a max PIN attempts. So my organizational standard is after 4 failed PIN attempts, we are going to require that user to reset their PIN. The offline grace periods are really nice to see because you'll see after 720 days, we can actually fully block access, or excuse me, after 720 minutes, we will actually block access to the user. And if they've been offline for more than 90 days, we are going to wipe that data. Again, these values are customizable to you based on your organization, but these are great 3 default security policies we highly recommend organizations take advantage of. The last one under device conditions I really want to talk about is jailbroken or rooted devices. We want to block access, and you heard me mention that on the multi-factor auth and conditional access demo. It's not uncommon at all for organizations to want to completely block jailbroken or rooted devices. While some end users may have jailbroken devices because they're using dev applications or just maybe some things that they think are really cool features on the OS, it's not necessarily a secure device in your organization. So again, we want to block any sort of jailbroken device, and we can contact that user and just let them know why it's been blocked. The other cool thing that we can do is actually require a minimum OS version. So it is not uncommon for iOS builds or Android builds to have been out of date or no longer supported by your organization. You may feel, hey, this Android build isn't the most secure anymore, so we're going to require you be on this minimum level of iOS or Android build. But again, we'll leave these as default. So the next area we actually hop to is our assignment screen again. So whether we want to exclude groups or include, my included group is we're going to stick to this demo and say it's just our engineering team for now, and then we can expand this out to a larger group. So we'll go ahead and select next. We can review our default policies here. Everything looks good. And we're going to create this app protection policy. And so you see here, the last step we'd have to do is actually move to deploy this policy. And so the last thing I really would just want to show is the monitoring. So we'll hop into this monitor tab here. We're going to take a look at app install status. Again, this is a demo tenant, so a lot of things aren't populated, but you can easily see platforms, user failure, and device failures. We can even export this out. And then as far as our app protection policies go, we can easily see assigned users, flagged users, potential user apps. Again, this is a demo tenant, so none of this is populated yet, but you see we have our assigned users, and again, we can actually export these reports. So again, we kind of covered, we did cover deploying the Teams app on the mobile front. We also created a secure access policy when accessing our Teams mobile applications, requiring multi-factor authentication if we deem that user sign-in is a medium or high risk. And then lastly, we closed it out with creating app protection policies for not just Microsoft Teams, but Teams, SharePoint, Outlook, and OneDrive. So let's go ahead and hop back into the presentation now.
Earlier, John showed us how to install Teams, how to apply conditional access policies, and an intro into Intune app protection policies, along with showing us how to use monitoring and reporting. Let's take a look at how these policies look on iOS devices in a BYOD scenario. Let's start out by opening up our iOS device. And we notice that we do not have Teams installed, so we'll go ahead and download Teams. Now that we've downloaded Teams from the Apple Store, we should be able to open up Teams and get started on using the application. Teams wants us to log in and use an account to log into the application, so we're going to use our secure account for that. We're going to go ahead and allow notifications to be used by Teams, so that way we can get our notifications. We're going to allow it to use our microphone. And immediately we get a notification that says your organization is now protecting its data in this app. You need to restart the app to continue. And this shows that the Intune app protection policies are being applied to the Microsoft Teams app to show that we have the data loss and prevention policies that the IT Pro admin configured in the Microsoft Endpoint Management Admin Console. I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. This is going to close our app back out, and it's going to force us to reopen the app. Once the app opens back up, all of the policies that have been created to protect Microsoft Teams will begin to apply. The first thing we see on this device is the requirement for a device passcode. If you notice in the beginning when I went into the device, there was no pin to gain access to the desktop or the home screen for the iPad. And so this is the great scenario for IT pro admins to enforce a device pin on mobile devices, especially BYOD devices that are out there in remote worker scenarios or just out there in the field. And you're not fully aware if there are device pins because this is not an enrolled device. This is a great way to add a basic layer of security by requiring a device pin to be provided on those particular devices. Because the Intune app protection access control policy, which requires a PIN, it works in conjunction with the device PIN on the actual mobile device. And that's for iOS and Android devices. So we're going to go ahead and click OK here. And we're going to need to go back and actually set up a device PIN in order to gain access into Microsoft Teams. In the settings of the iOS device, we're going to touch on Touch ID and passcode. Hit the turn on passcode. We're going to create a PIN. I'm going to verify that PIN. Now we can go back to our Teams application, and once we open that application up, we should be now able to open the application. As you can see, you can go through the beginner pages, and now we have access to Teams. This, again, is a great way to apply security to bring your own devices by requiring that those devices have pins. The access pin for the application requires that there be a device pin set up, and that starts a base level of security for Microsoft Teams. Next, let's talk about how we can secure documents that are being used inside of Teams. So what we're going to show here is how copy, cut, and paste can be prevented from pulling data from one application that's not managed by the Intune application protection policy into an unmanaged application on the device itself. So Megan, who's an IT administrator, is going to create a document, and this document is going to be in Word. In this Word document, obviously, as you can see here, it's a confidential document, and it just a test document, just some information in here. Please do not edit this document in any third-party applications or store the contents in personal storage account. This document contains sensitive information that cannot be shared with the public. Thank you, HR. Which are wonderful fake document here, right? But what we're going to show here is how this information being shared inside of Teams should be secured and should be contained within inside of managed applications. All right. So Megan is going to share this document. And we're just going to copy the link here. So the link has been copied. Megan is then going to go to our secure worker, look for a conversation that we have, and share this document. And we're just going to paste that link in the chat window there. Now this document has been shared. And basically the way the policy works for links for shared documents is anyone that has the link to the document can actually access the document unless you have specified otherwise in the permissions of the link that you're providing the end user. So now Megan has shared this link with the secure worker. So we're going to go see what the secure worker is going to do on the mobile device to see how that information is being protected. Now we're back in our mobile device. As you can see down at the bottom, we've got a chat message here. So we're going to go ahead and click on that chat message. And look, we've got a message from Megan. All right, looks like today Megan wants to share a document with us. So we're going to go ahead and click on that document. And that's going to open up Microsoft Word on this particular device. Now that we have our document open, what we're going to do is we're going to basically pretend or just take an action of we're taking this data to create another documentation. And we're going to totally ignore the confidential statement here, and we're going to see if we can copy this information into another application that's unmanaged. We like to use notes, so we're going to go inside of notes and we're going to create a brand new note here. And immediately when we try to paste that information into an unmanaged application, we get a notification that says your organization of data cannot be pasted here. This is, again, another way to protect data from in Microsoft that is shared across Microsoft Teams, because we've applied an app protection policy that prevents copy, cut, and paste of information into other unmanaged applications. As you can see, Megan shared a document with the secure worker, and Megan shared that document, which was confidential and had app protection policies applied to it. Now, the secure worker may have not been paying attention, or let's just say copied the information and was working inside of a managed documentation, and then went to go do some other work inside of the unmanaged application and hit the paste option and accidentally, went to paste that information into that document. Well, Intune App Protection came to the rescue. It was able to prevent that information from being moved from that secure location in OneDrive and SharePoint, being shared to that particular secure worker via Teams that was copied into the notes on the application on the iOS device. And this is the end result. That data is protected, and the end user is now getting a notification that it has been protected. All right. Now let's take a look at Intune App Protection selective wipe capabilities. Intune App Protection allows you to wipe devices that have been lost or stolen, or create device or access control policies that either block the device or wipe the device upon trying to access corporate data. So let's go into the Microsoft Endpoint Management Console and take a look at what capabilities we have here. All right, so we're going to select on App Protection, and then under App Protection, we will select App Selective Wipe. And here, as you can see, I have some previous policies that I've set up to wipe, but we're just going to create a new one here and just show you how these are able to be created. So you're going to select a user, because what we're going to do here is swipe a device based off of a user, a specific user. We know that the user we want to wipe is our secure worker, who is our remote worker in this scenario. I'm going to select this user, and then we're going to apply it to that user. Immediately we get the name of the device and the type of the device, so we know that it's my iPad, and then the device type is an iPad. We're just going to select that. I'm going to say create that policy. Okay. So we have a Microsoft Teams wipe policy going. All right. Now, if you need to delete these policies, delete the wipe request. So if you're looking to say, hey, I don't want to wipe that device, then you could just come back and say, delete that wipe request. All right. And that takes the wipe request away. Now let's take a look at other ways to wipe the policy, to wipe the device based off of the policies that we've created. So we're going to go to our Intune App Protection policies for this particular user, and under properties, we're going to go in and edit, and we're going to go down to conditional launch. I'm going to do edit here. And one thing you'll notice is that we have different app conditions, and then we have different device conditions. And the app conditions allow us to create a new policy based off of the minimum app version, based off of the minimum SDK version. And once we set either one of those, that gives us the ability to select what we want to do, whether we want to block access based off of the minimum app version, or wipe the data, or warn the end user. We also have the same thing, or similar policies under device condition, where we're looking at the minimum operating system, or we're looking at the device model. So maybe you're a company or a corporation that only supports a certain model of device. And then we have maximum allowed device threat level, and that goes to the compliance or the health attestation of the particular device you're working with. So we're going to cancel that. We're actually going to delete these because we're not going to use those. What we are going to do is we are going to create a minimum operating system version. And we're going to use 13.4.0. I believe iOS is currently up to 13.6, but we're going to use 13.4. And we're going to see we're going to block access. Now, one of the things we could use is a wipe data. Let's just say in this scenario, this is a device that was or a device that was stolen or an identity that was stolen, device, the end user, whoever lost the device, let's say the threat actor is trying to use that particular account or use that device, and somewhere down the line, the operating system, the OS version for that device has changed. And based off an Intune app protection policy that we've set, we're only allowing us for certain operating system to connect to our corporate data. Or in another scenario, let's just say you have line of business apps that you produce, and those line of business apps connect to certain versions of operating systems. And if those operating systems were to change, that would misalign the capability of that application to function on that device. So you may want to lock that device or prevent data access based off of the operating system because your line of business apps only work with certain versions of the operating system. And so let's say maybe you want to wipe data in a lost or stolen device scenario or a threat actor scenario, or in this case, you may want to, as a corporate device that got an update, you want to block access so that way the user knows to call in the help desk and get assistance with um, going to a previous version of the operating system so that the application will function properly. Now let's take a look at our mobile device and how it interacts with these particular policies. So we're going to open up Teams, and the policy we've applied here is the operating system uh, conditional acts device condition policy. So let's remove this policy right here because we're not going to use that. We're going to save this, and that policy is now saved. We can now go back to our iPad here. Let's open up Teams. And immediately upon opening up Teams, Teams recognizes, based off of the Intune app protection policy, that this device is not at a minimum operating system. The minimum operating system, as you can see, it says that this app runs on iOS 13.4.0 or higher. You can remove this account from the app, or if possible, update the OS version in the device. Okay, so it's giving me the option to remove the account or to go back and fix my error. This is a great, again, another great security policy to protect the Teams application. Because, like I said again, maybe there are other line of business applications that you use to collaborate with Teams, and that particular line of business application or that particular document or whatever you're sharing requires a specific version of the operating system. And that operating system is supported by the IT Pro or help desk team or your corporate organization. Okay. Next, we're going to take a look at actually enforcing a wipe based off of a lost or stolen device scenario. Now let's dive into actually selecting wiping this device. I'm going to go into App Selective Wipe and create a policy to wipe the device. User we have here is our secure worker. Let's select that user. Gives me the name of the device I'm trying to wipe and the device type. It's an iPad. Create that policy. And now we see the actual wipe policies for that particular device. So we're going to go back to now our device. And we're actually going to open up our applications and see if our applications pick up that wipe policy. Next, we want to talk about wiping devices. There comes need to wipe corporate data off of devices when those devices are no longer owned by the organization or no longer owned by the user, or it may be a lost device scenario. And in those scenarios, we have multiple ways of wiping a device with Intune app protection. The admin can wipe the device by sending a wipe command to the device, or the IT pro admin can actually set up policies that set conditions that wipe the device. So first, let's take a look at these conditions and see what's capable inside of Intune App Protection. In the Microsoft Endpoint admin console, we're going to go to App Protection Policies. And as our policies come up, once we get our policy, we're going to select on the policy that we created. Open up our policy here. Go to policies. I'm just going to edit our access requirements. Actually, not access requirements. We'll go back and we'll get the conditional launch because that's what it is. A conditional launch policy is what I want to start out with. And one of the things you notice here, it says offline grace period. And the offline grace period gives you a time to provide when this device goes offline. So let's just say in a scenario where the user loses the device or the device is not connected to the internet for X amount of times, and this value being 90. And basically what we can do here is we can actually set this to wipe that particular data. And this is a selective wipe. So basically it's going to wipe all of the corporate data off of that device. Or what you can do is set up a device condition, which means if the device does not meet a certain condition, then you can wipe the data or block access. Now, if the device is obviously jailbroken or a rooted device, we want to wipe data from that device immediately because we do not want these compromised devices to use Teams or to access corporate data from Teams that lies in SharePoint or OneDrive for Business. We can also set a policy that says a minimum operating system, and we can set that minimum operating system to devices with operating systems that we no longer support. This scenario is built around, say, we're using line of business apps, and those line of business apps uh, require that we have certain versions of the iOS operating system. And so your corporation may tend to always take the latest and greatest or a specific version of the operating system so that the line of business apps can function properly. So what you can do is you can set up policies that will block access to data if the end user is not at a version of the operating system that that works with the line of business apps. And what you can do is block access, or you can change this policy to wipe data. So that's another way you can wipe data with this particular Intune app protection policies. All right. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a more direct way. Let's say this device is actually lost and the help desk has gotten a request to wipe the device. And so we're going to look at now how to do so inside of the console here. We'll go back to apps. We'll go to down at the bottom under other here, you will see under other, you will see selective wipe. And then we're going to create a selective wipe policy. Select the user. We know that this particular user that we're working with is the secure worker. And we're going to select this for the secure worker. And I'm going to select the device that's being used. I'm going to select create. And now that device has a selective policy set to wipe the device. Now let's take a look at our mobile device. I'm going to switch over to our Teams application, open it up, and immediately we're going to see a prompt that says org data removal. This means that the device has been sent a policy. It says your organization has removed its data associated with this app to reconnect to your organization data, sign in to your work or school account. This notification tells us that the wipe command that we sent from the device has made it down to the application. We're going to select OK here, and that's going to begin a process of wiping the device. And this is a selective wipe again. Like I said, this is only wiping corporate data off of this particular application. So if there's any personal data that you may have saved, let's say you were working on something outside of work, maybe you were working on some schoolwork, maybe you're in school doing schoolwork and you have personal data that's saved, uh, that data should still be there. We're only selectively wiping corporate data. One of the other things that we can show is see how the other applications have picked up that same policy. You can also take a look back at our admin console and see what applications have picked up that wipe. Notice the Microsoft Edge application has picked up that wipe. Microsoft Teams, as we saw, picked up that selective wipe. We also will note that the Microsoft Word application is only sitting in pending because we have not opened the application. Once we open the application, we should see a selective wipe from the Microsoft Word application. As you can see here, the Teams application wants us to sign back in as we have wiped corporate data from that particular app. It's requesting that we sign back in to try and reestablish connection with corp data that's on that device. Um, but in this case, we have wiped the device. And that completes our review of selectively wiping corporate data for Microsoft Teams and other productivity applications.